They told you he went down swinging, rifle in hand, the last hero standing, a legend carved in stone. But what if everything you've been taught about Davy Crockett's death at the Alamo was a lie? What if the real story was so brutal, so inconvenient, that an entire nation chose to bury it forever? The legend and the man. Every American child learned the same story. Davy Crockett, king of the wild frontier. Raised in the Tennessee backwoods, a bear hunter before he could shave, a congressman who spoke plain truth to power in Washington, and finally, the hero of the Alamo. The man who swung his rifle like a club, who fought alone against impossible odds, who died on his feet so that Texas could live free. That was the story. Told in schoolbooks. Painted on murals. Immortalized by Disney and John Wayne on the silver screen. For over 100 years, it was the only story that America allowed. But history is rarely as clean as legend. And the truth about what happened inside those crumbling stone walls on March 6, 1836, at the climax of the 13-day siege of the Alamo, is far more complicated, far more human, and in many ways far more terrifying than any Hollywood script ever dared to show. David Crockett was born on August 17, 1786, in the wild mountains of Greene County, Tennessee. His father ran a tavern on the road between Knoxville and Virginia, a rough, rowdy place where frontier life was lived hard and died young. Young David barely attended school, running away from home at age 12 to escape a beating from his father. He spent years drifting through the backwoods as a wagoner, a day laborer, and eventually a militiaman. But what Davy Crockett had, more than any education or silver spoon upbringing could ever provide, was a gift for storytelling and a larger-than-life personality that drew people to him like moths to a flame. He became famous across Tennessee not just for his bear hunting exploits, but for the way he told the stories afterward. Grand, hilarious, self-deprecating, and gloriously exaggerated. He once claimed to have killed 105 bears in a single season. That charisma carried him all the way to the United States Congress, where he served 3 terms as a Tennessee representative. He was the people's politician, anti-establishment, anti-Jackson, deeply suspicious of centralized power. When he lost his final re-election bid in 1835, he famously told his constituents, "You can go to hell. I am going to Texas. The road to the Alamo." And go to Texas he did. In the autumn of 1835, Crockett gathered a small band of Tennessee volunteers, tough, sharpshooting frontiersmen like himself, and rode southwest. He was 50 years old. Not a young man by frontier standards. But the Texas Revolution was calling, and Davy Crockett never backed down from a call to adventure. As he traveled south, Crockett worked the crowds like the born politician he was. Everywhere he stopped, every tavern, every town square, people came out to hear him speak. He told them about Texas. About liberty. About the injustice of Mexican General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, who had dissolved the Mexican Congress and declared himself dictator. He signed his oath to the Provisional Government of Texas on January 14, 1836, trading his service for a promise of land. He was a man re-energized, heading toward what he imagined would be one last great adventure before settling into frontier life. He arrived at the Alamo on February 8, 1836, riding in with approximately 30 Tennessee volunteers. The garrison erupted in cheers. Crockett was already a living legend. The men inside those walls knew exactly who he was. He played his fiddle that night around a campfire, singing and joking with soldiers who suddenly believed, against all rational evidence, that they might actually survive what was coming. The Alamo itself was not, strictly speaking, a fortress. It had been a Spanish mission church, a place of worship, not war. Its walls were too long for its garrison to defend adequately, its fortifications crumbling and inadequate. General Sam Houston himself had ordered it abandoned and destroyed. The man he sent to carry out those orders, Jim Bowie, arrived, took one look at the strategic position, and decided to hold it instead. William Barrett Travis, the young, fire-breathing commander, agreed. Together with Bowie and now Crockett, they commanded a garrison of roughly 180 to 200 men. Against them, marching north with 6,000 soldiers, came General Santa Anna, the Napoleon of the West, with orders to crush the Texas rebellion without mercy. The 13-day siege. On February 23, 1836, Santa Anna's army arrived at the outskirts of San Antonio de Bexar. They raised a blood-red flag above the town's church tower. The message was unmistakable: no quarter. No prisoners. No mercy. Surrender or die. Travis answered with a cannon shot. For 13 days, the Alamo held. Santa Anna's artillery bombarded the old mission walls day and night. The defenders slept in shifts, repaired breaches, and waited desperately for reinforcements that would never come. Travis sent rider after rider through enemy lines with urgent appeals, to the Texas Provisional Government, to James Fannin 90 miles away at Golid. To anyone who would listen, nobody came. Fannin cited logistical difficulties and turned back. The provisional government was paralyzed by politics. Only 32 men from the town of Gonzales slipped through Santa Anna's lines on March 1 to reinforce the garrison. Davy Crockett commanded the most exposed, most vulnerable section of the entire Alamo complex, the wooden palisade that connected the church to the southern wall. It was a low, roughly constructed barricade, the weakest link in an already desperate defense. Crockett's Tennessee sharpshooters crouched behind it, rifles blazing, holding off repeated Mexican probes. Travis wrote during the siege that wherever morale was low, wherever men were beginning to crack, he sent Crockett. The frontiersman walked the walls in full view of enemy muskets, cracking jokes, telling stories, daring the Mexican snipers to shoot. He claimed at one point to have killed 5 Mexican artillerymen in succession as each one tried to operate a cannon aimed at the fort. Some historians believe he may have even narrowly missed Santa Anna himself, who had apparently underestimated the range of the Tennesseans' long rifles. Today, as the days dragged on and no relief materialized, the mood inside the Alamo grew darker. Men stopped sleeping. Supplies dwindled. The Mexican artillery fire intensified. On the night of March 5, 1836, Santa Anna made his decision. The assault would come before dawn. The final assault. In the pitch darkness of early March 6, 1836, at approximately 5:30 in the morning, nearly 2,000 Mexican soldiers moved silently into position around the Alamo on 4 sides simultaneously. Santa Anna's band struck up the haunting melody of the Diguelo, the ancient Spanish battle hymn that signaled no mercy, no quarter, no prisoners. The assault began in chaos. Mexican bugles screamed. Thousands of boots pounded the frozen earth. The first wave crashed against the north wall in the darkness, men scrambling over each other, trying to raise scaling ladders against walls raked by rifle fire. The Tennesseans at Crockett's palisade opened up with devastating accuracy, dropping soldiers in rows, but there were too many. There were always too many. The Mexican forces suffered horrific casualties in those first terrible minutes. By some estimates, 600 soldiers died in the 90-minute battle. But sheer numbers began to tell. The north wall was breached. Then the west. Travis fell early, shot in the head at his post on the north wall in the first minutes of the assault. Jim Bowie lay helpless in the barracks, ravaged by typhoid fever. Accounts say Mexican soldiers found him on his cot and bayoneted him there. He may have been unconscious. He never had the fighting death that legend later assigned him. The defenders fell back from the walls into the interior, the long barracks, the church, the small rooms of the old mission complex. The fighting became brutal, hand-to-hand, room by room. Men used rifles as clubs when ammunition ran out. Others drew knives. The screaming of the wounded echoed off the stone walls. The battle lasted approximately 90 minutes. By 7 o'clock in the morning, it was over, and this is where the story, the real story, begins to fracture. The truth that was buried. The official American narrative, the one hammered into place by Texas historians and later cemented by Hollywood, says Davy Crockett died fighting to the last. That he swung Old Betsy, his beloved flintlock rifle, until the Mexican bayonets finally took him. That he went down on his feet, surrounded by heaps of slain enemies, a warrior to the very end. Some evidence supports this. A former enslaved man named Ben, who served as cook for one of Santa Anna's officers, entered the Alamo immediately after the battle and reported finding Crockett's body in the barracks surrounded by no fewer than 16 dead Mexican soldiers, with Crockett's own knife buried to the hilt in one of them. Another account, from a Mexican captain, described a defender at the entrance to one of the rooms who plunged his knife into every soldier who tried to enter, until his right arm was shattered by a shot, whereupon he switched the knife to his left hand and kept fighting until a point-blank volley finally killed him. That defender was later identified as Quacky. Crockett. But other accounts, circulating within days of the battle, reported in newspapers in New Orleans as early as March 11, 1836, tell a different story. They say that when the fighting ended, a small group of surviving defenders was found alive. That Mexican General Castrillon, a humane officer who respected bravery, found them, promised them his personal protection, and brought them before Santa Anna. Among those survivors, according to multiple accounts, was a tall man in buckskins. A man who gave his name, when asked, as David Crockett of Tennessee. Santa Anna stared at the man who had held his palisade against thousands of his soldiers. And then, ignoring General Castrillon's protests and his own officers' pleas for mercy, he ordered the survivors executed on the spot. Mexican officers drew their swords. The most detailed account of this execution comes from Colonel José Enrique de la Pena, a Mexican officer who was present at the Alamo that morning. His diary, preserved for over a century before being published in Mexico in 1955 and translated into English in 1975, describes watching Santa Anna's officers cut down the surviving defenders with their blades. Crockett, he wrote, died without flinching. The account ignited a firestorm that still burns today. Crockett's defenders, furious, passionate ones who sent hate mail and made midnight phone calls to the translator, insisted it was a forgery, a lie, a smear against an American hero. Texas historian Reuben Potter had set the tone as far back as 1880. Dismissing all surrender accounts as slander against the hero and insisting Crockett fought to the last breath. The truth, if we are honest, is that we do not know with absolute certainty how Davy Crockett died on the morning of March 6, 1836. The battle was chaos, the witnesses were scattered, and powerful forces on both sides of the cultural divide had enormous interest in shaping the narrative. What we know is this: Davy Crockett was at the Alamo. He fought with everything he had for 13 days. He inspired men who were afraid and held a line that no one else wanted to hold. Whether he died swinging his rifle in the final assault or was captured and executed by Santa Anna's order, he did not run. He did not hide. He stood his ground in the most terrifying circumstances imaginable, 50 years old, 1,000 miles from home, against an army of thousands, and then, when the last smoke cleared and the bodies were dragged to a stand of trees and burned, when the ashes of the Alamo's defenders were left unmarked in a peach orchard outside San Antonio, the men who needed a myth got busy erasing the parts that didn't fit. They turned a complicated, fully human death into a cartoon of perfect heroism. They silenced the witnesses who told a different story. They built a legend so powerful that the truth has been fighting to breathe ever since, but history always comes back. The ashes of Davy Crockett, whatever the final truth of his last moments, contain something that no myth can manufacture: the reality of a man who chose, freely, to stand in an impossible place and refuse to leave. Remember the Alamo. But remember it as it was, not as we wished it to be.